April 4, 1994. 11:47 p.m. In a small notebook with a red cover, Kurt Cobain writes his final diary entry. Not the suicide note that would be found with his body, but something more intimate, his last private conversation with himself about why tomorrow would be his final day on Earth. What Kurt wrote in that diary wasn't discovered until years after his death, hidden in a box of personal belongings that Courtney Love couldn't bear to go through. When those pages were finally read, they revealed the most honest, heartbreaking account of a man's final hours ever committed to paper. These weren't the rambling thoughts of someone in crisis, these were the deliberate words of someone who had made peace with an impossible decision. Kurt's final diary entry reads like a letter to himself, a goodbye to the person he used to be, and an explanation for a choice that would devastate millions. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what Kurt Cobain wrote in his secret diary the night before he died will change everything you thought you knew about his final decision and why he believed it was the only way to save the people he loved most. 1992, the beginning of the end. Kurt Cobain started keeping a private diary in 1992, during the height of Nirvana's success, when the world saw him as grunge's conquering hero, but he felt more isolated than ever. The small red notebook was something he carried everywhere, not for song lyrics or band notes, but for the thoughts he couldn't share with anyone else. Writing helped me figure out what was real and what was just the noise, Kurt had told his friend Dylan Carlson. Sometimes I didn't know what I was thinking until I saw it on paper. The diary entries from 1992 and 1993 paint a picture of someone struggling to reconcile his private self with his public image. Early entries are filled with observations about fame, relationships, and the strange experience of having your personal pain become entertainment for millions. Played the MTV Unplugged thing today. Everyone kept saying how authentic and raw it was. But it felt like performing sadness for people who want to feel deep without actually hurting. Is that what my whole career has become? Professional depression? As the months passed, the entries became darker, more introspective. Kurt wrote about feeling like a fraud, about the guilt of being wealthy while singing about poverty, about the constant pressure to be the voice of a generation that he felt he barely understood himself. I keep waiting for someone to figure out that I'm not the person they think I am. That I'm not wise or profound or even that talented. I'm just a scared kid from Aberdeen who got lucky with a few chord progressions. But it was the entries from early 1994, after Kurt's overdose in Rome, that revealed the depth of his desperation. The handwriting became shakier, more erratic, as if the act of writing itself required enormous effort. Woke up in the hospital again. Courtney crying, Frances looking at me like she doesn't recognize her daddy. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe the person I'm becoming isn't someone she should know. The diary became Kurt's confessional, the one place where he could be completely honest about his mental state without worrying about how it would affect his family, his band, or his fans. Page after page revealed a man drowning in his own success, unable to find joy in the things that should have made him happy. Every time I pick up a guitar now, I feel like I'm lying. The music that used to save me just reminds me how trapped I am. How do you tell people that the songs they love are killing the person who wrote them? The entries from March 1994 show Kurt wrestling with thoughts of suicide almost daily, but also trying to find reasons to stay alive. He wrote lists of things he was grateful for, people who would miss him, projects he wanted to finish. But each positive entry was followed by darker thoughts. Frances smiled at me today, and for a second I remembered what it felt like to be happy. But then I thought about what kind of father I'm going to be if I can't even take care of myself. What if I pass my sadness to her? What if loving me hurts her? The final weeks of entries reveal a man systematically saying goodbye to different aspects of his life. He wrote about his favorite records as if he was cataloging them for the last time. He described places in Seattle that had meant something to him, people who had been kind to him, moments when he had felt genuinely alive. Drove past the apartment where we wrote Nevermind today. Remembered how it felt when we first played Smells Like Teen Spirit and knew we had something special. I wish I could go back to that moment and stay there forever, when the music was still just music and not a prison. But it was the entry dated April 3, 1994, just one day before his death, that revealed Kurt's final decision. I think I know what I have to do now. It's not fair to Francis or Courtney or the guys to keep pretending I can get better. Some people are too broken to fix, and holding on to them just breaks everyone else. Maybe the kindest thing I can do is let go before I drag them down with me. This wasn't the impulsive decision of someone in momentary crisis. This was the conclusion of a long, agonizing process of self-examination that Kurt had been documenting for months. The diary shows a man who didn't want to die, but who had convinced himself that his death was the most loving thing he could give to the people who cared about him. The red notebook was found in Kurt's bedroom 3 months after his death, hidden in a drawer beneath old magazines and photographs. When Courtney finally worked up the courage to read it, she found not just the record of her husband's mental decline, but proof of how much he had loved her and Francis, even as that love had ultimately convinced him to leave them. April 4, 1994, 11:47 p.m. Kurt Cobain's final diary entry begins with a simple observation that would become heartbreaking in hindsight: "It's so quiet tonight. Even the voices in my head have finally shut up." The entry, written in Kurt's increasingly shaky handwriting, spans 3 full pages of his small red notebook. Unlike his previous entries, which often jumped between topics and emotions, this final piece of writing reads like a carefully considered letter, not to anyone specific, but to life itself. "I keep thinking about what Dad said when I was a kid, Kurt. Some people are just built wrong, and no amount of wanting to be different will change that. I used to hate him for saying it, but maybe he was preparing me for tonight. Maybe he knew something about our family that I'm just now figuring out." This reference to his father reveals the deep-seated sense of genetic inevitability that had haunted Kurt throughout his adult life. His family history was marked by depression, addiction, and early death. Kurt had often spoken about feeling like he was following a predetermined path that he couldn't escape. The entry continues with Kurt systematically addressing different people in his life, as if he was having final conversations with each of them. "Courtney, I know you'll be angry, and you should be. You married someone you thought was worth saving, but I've been lying to both of us about that. You're so strong, so brilliant, so capable of real happiness. Find someone who can match that energy instead of draining it. Francis needs to see what love looks like when it doesn't hurt. Dave and Christ, thank you for letting me turn my noise into music. Thank you for understanding that I needed to scream and helping me make it sound beautiful. The band was the closest thing to magic I ever experienced, and if I could have separated that from everything else, maybe this would be different. Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't be the son who figured it out. I'm sorry I couldn't break the cycle of sadness that seems to follow our family. Maybe this is where it ends, maybe Francis will be free of it because I stopped here." But it's the section addressed to his daughter Frances that reveals the true anguish behind Kurt's decision. "My little bean, you're sleeping in the next room and I keep wanting to go wake you up and explain everything. But you're too young to understand that Daddy is sick in a way that medicine can't fix. I'm leaving now while you still think I'm a good person, before you're old enough to see how broken I really am. I hope when you grow up and read this, you'll understand that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm so scared of becoming the kind of father who teaches his daughter that love comes with pain, that caring about someone means watching them suffer." The diary entry then shifts to Kurt's reflection on fame and its role in his mental decline. "Everyone thinks being famous would solve their problems, but it just makes everything louder. The sadness, the fear, the feeling of being completely alone even when you're surrounded by people who claim to love you. I used to think if I could just make the perfect album, or write the perfect song, it would quiet the noise in my head. But the bigger the music got, the smaller I felt. The worst part is knowing that millions of people look to me for something I can't even give myself. How do you tell your fans that their hero wants to die? How do you explain that the person they think is so deep and meaningful can't find a single reason to wake up tomorrow? Near the end of the entry, Kurt's writing becomes more philosophical, as if he's trying to make sense of his decision in cosmic terms. I keep thinking about that line from the Pixies, I am un chien Andalusia. A creature that doesn't quite fit in either world, too strange for normal life but not strange enough to be special. Maybe that's what I've always been, something caught between two places, never really belonging anywhere. There's this weight I've been carrying since I was a kid, this feeling that I'm fundamentally wrong somehow. Every good thing that's happened, the music, the success, Francis, even loving Courtney, has felt like I was stealing it from someone who deserved it more. Maybe it's time to give it all back. The final paragraphs of the entry show Kurt trying to convince himself that his suicide is actually an act of love. I used to think that staying alive was the brave thing to do, that giving up was cowardly. But maybe the real cowardice is holding on when you know you're just hurting everyone around you. Maybe knowing when to let go is its own kind of courage. Tomorrow I'm going to end the noise. Not because I'm angry or because I want to hurt anyone, but because I finally understand that some people are meant to burn bright and quick, like matches in the dark. I've been a candle trying to be a lighthouse, and all I've done is melt all over everything I was supposed to illuminate. The entry ends with a line that would haunt everyone who read it. The music will live longer than I will, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to leave something beautiful behind and trust that it will find the people who need it. Good night, world. Thank you for letting me make some noise before I go. Below these final words, Kurt had drawn a small heart and written for FBC Francis being Cobain. It was his final signature on a life that had given the world some of its most honest music, even as it had demanded more than he was capable of giving. This diary entry, found months after Kurt's death, provided a window into the mind of someone who didn't die because he hated life, but because he loved the people in his life too much to keep burdening them with his pain. It was the final proof that behind every suicide is not just a death, but a human being who ran out of ways to keep going. The discovery that changed everything. When Courtney Love finally found the courage to read Kurt's diary 3 months after his death, she was expecting to find anger, resentment, maybe even blame for the way their marriage had unraveled. Instead, she found something that devastated her more completely than any accusation could have, proof of how deeply Kurt had loved her, and how that love had ultimately convinced him that leaving was the kindest thing he could do. Reading those pages was like having my heart ripped out all over again, Courtney revealed years later in a rare interview about the diary. I kept waiting for him to blame me for something, to give me a reason to be angry instead of just broken. But there was no anger. There was just this terrible, misguided love that had convinced him we'd be better off without him. The diary contained several entries specifically about Courtney that she had never seen before, observations about their relationship that showed Kurt paying attention to details she didn't even know he'd noticed. Watched C working on her music today. The way she gets completely absorbed, completely fearless about being vulnerable. She creates from a place of strength that I've never been able to find. Sometimes I think she married me thinking I was like her, but I'm just good at performing strength while falling apart inside. She deserves someone who can match her energy, who can be a real partner instead of someone she has to constantly worry about and take care of. She spent so much time trying to save me that she's forgotten how to just be happy for herself. But it was the entries about Francis that broke Courtney's heart completely. Francis looked at me today and I saw something in her eyes that terrified me. She was studying my face the way I used to study my dad's when I was trying to figure out why he was always so sad. I can't let her grow up thinking that's what love looks like. I can't let her learn to take care of broken adults before she's even learned to take care of herself. Every time she hugs me, I feel like I'm lying to her. How do you explain to a 2-year-old that her daddy is sick in a way that makes everything hurt? How do you tell her that the safest place for her is away from the person who loves her most? These revelations showed that Kurt's suicide wasn't the impulsive act of someone in momentary despair, but the calculated decision of someone who genuinely believed he was protecting his family from himself. The diary entries reveal months of internal debate, with Kurt constantly weighing his love for Frances and Courtney against his fear of damaging them with his presence. Maybe the greatest gift I can give Frances is the gift of not remembering me clearly. She's young enough that I'll just be stories and photographs and music. She won't remember the days when Daddy couldn't get out of bed, or the times when Daddy scared her by being too sad to function. She'll remember the idea of me instead of the broken reality. Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic were also devastated when they learned about the diary entries concerning the band. Rather than the angry denunciations they might have expected from someone feeling trapped by success, they found gratitude and apologies. The guys keep trying to help me find my way back to loving music, but I think that part of me died somewhere along the way. Not because of them, they've been more loyal than I deserved. But because I started making music to escape from myself, and now that the music is everywhere, there's nowhere left to hide. Dave especially keeps suggesting breaks, time off, maybe a solo project. He doesn't understand that the problem isn't the band, the problem is me. I've poisoned my relationship with music the same way I poison everything else I touch. The diary also revealed Kurt's awareness of how his death would affect his fans, something that clearly tormented him. I know there are kids out there who feel like I'm the only one who understands them. The thought of disappointing them, of making them feel more alone, is almost enough to keep me here. But what if staying alive and continuing to get worse disappoints them more? What if they need to see that their hero was just as lost as they are? Maybe my death will at least be honest in a way my life couldn't be. Maybe it will show people that success and fame can't fix the kind of sadness I carry around. Maybe that's more valuable than pretending I have answers when I'm barely surviving the questions. Perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was a section of the diary where Kurt had tried to write letters to Frances for her future birthdays, messages she could read when she turned 10, 16, 18, 21. But each attempt had been crossed out, abandoned when Kurt realized he couldn't predict what kind of person his daughter would become or what she might need to hear from a father she would barely remember. I keep trying to write something that will help her understand when she's older. But how do you explain suicide to your own child? How do you tell her that you loved her too much to stay? It sounds insane even to me, but I can't think of any other way to protect her from what I'm becoming. The final entries about his family show Kurt trying to convince himself that his absence would be less damaging than his presence. They'll grieve, but grief ends. Living with someone who's fundamentally broken doesn't. Frances will have Courtney's strength and Kurt's music, but she won't have Kurt's sadness. That trade feels worth making. These diary entries completely reframed how Kurt's family understood his final decision. Rather than abandonment born from selfishness or despair, they saw a twisted form of sacrifice, a man who loved his family so much that he believed dying for them was preferable to living with them. It was a logic that made Kurt's suicide even more tragic, because it showed that the love that might have saved him was the very thing that convinced him he needed to die. The confession Dylan Carlson never heard. Among the most devastating revelations in Kurt Cobain's final diary entries are the pages dedicated to his best friend Dylan Carlson, the last person to see Kurt alive, and the man who unknowingly provided him with the gun he would use to end his life. These entries reveal Kurt's internal struggle with involving his closest friend in his final plan, and the elaborate emotional distance he created to protect Dylan from guilt. Had lunch with Dylan today. He keeps asking if I'm okay, and I keep lying to him. The terrible thing is that I'm getting good at it. I can make anyone believe I'm fine now, which means I'm ready. When you can fool the people who know you best, you've perfected the performance of being alive. The diary reveals that Kurt had been planning his suicide for weeks, but had been careful not to involve Dylan directly. The entries show Kurt manipulating situations to get what he needed while maintaining plausible deniability for his friend. Asked Dylan to get me a gun for protection because of all the crazy fans and stalkers. He believes it because he's a good friend who wants to help. But really I'm asking him to hand me my freedom. He'll blame himself forever, and I hate that about this plan, but I can't figure out another way. The worst part is that Dylan is the one person who might have been able to talk me out of this. He knows me better than anyone, sees through my bullshit better than Courtney or the band or anyone else. That's exactly why I can't tell him what I'm planning. He'd try to save me, and I'd probably let him, and then we'd just be back here in 6 months when the sadness gets too heavy again. These entries reveal the calculated nature of Kurt's final weeks, not the impulsive actions of someone in crisis, but the careful planning of someone who had made peace with an irreversible decision. Kurt describes systematically distancing himself from the people who cared about him most, creating emotional space that would make his absence feel less shocking. Been kind of cold to Dylan lately. Picking fights over stupid stuff, acting like I don't need him around. It's cruel but necessary. When I'm gone, I want him to remember being annoyed with me, not devastated by losing me. Anger is easier to survive than love. But the diary also shows Kurt's profound guilt about the position he was putting his best friend in. Dylan thinks he's helping me protect myself, but he's actually helping me destroy myself. The gun he got me isn't going to save Kurt Cobain from crazy fans, it's going to save crazy fans from Kurt Cobain. That's the kind of joke my life has become. The most heartbreaking entry is dated April 3rd, just one day before Kurt's death, after what would be his final conversation with Dylan. Spent the afternoon with Dylan. We didn't talk about anything important, just music and stupid shit like we always do. He made me laugh for the first time in weeks, and for a minute I almost told him everything. Almost asked for help one more time. But then I remembered how tired I am, how tired everyone around me must be. Some problems can't be fixed by friendship, no matter how good the friend is. Dylan is the closest thing to a brother I've ever had. He's been loyal when everyone else got sick of my drama, patient when everyone else ran out of patience. He deserves a better friend than someone who's about to ask him to live with this guilt forever. But I can't figure out how to die without involving him, and I can't figure out how to live with myself anymore. The diary reveals that Kurt had considered confessing his plans to Dylan several times, but had always pulled back. Almost told Dylan today that I was thinking about suicide. We were just sitting in his car listening to music, and it would have been so easy to say the words. But then I imagined his face, imagined him spending the rest of his life wondering if he could have said something different, done something better. I can't do that to him. Better to let him think this was sudden, unpredictable, impossible to prevent. After Kurt's death, Dylan Carlson was indeed consumed with guilt about providing the gun. For years, he blamed himself for his friend's suicide, wondering if he should have recognized the signs, should have asked more questions, should have refused to help Kurt acquire the weapon that ended his life. When portions of Kurt's diary were eventually shared with Dylan years later, they provided both comfort and additional anguish. Comfort in knowing that Kurt had deliberately hidden his intentions, that there was nothing Dylan could have done differently. But anguish in understanding how carefully Kurt had manipulated their final interactions to protect Dylan from the very guilt he ended up carrying anyway. Reading those diary entries was like getting one last letter from Kurt, Dylan said in a rare interview about his friend's death. It hurt to see how much thought he put into protecting me from his decision. But it also hurt to realize that he felt like he couldn't trust me with the truth, that he thought I was too weak to handle knowing what he was going through. The diary entries about Dylan reveal the impossible position Kurt felt trapped in during his final weeks. He needed help but couldn't ask for it directly. He wanted to say goodbye but couldn't reveal what he was saying goodbye to. He loved his friend too much to burden him with the truth, but that same love made his deception feel like another betrayal in a life that had become full of them. Dylan keeps telling me I can call him anytime, day or night, if I need anything. He means it, and that's what makes this so hard. He would drop everything to help me if he knew what I was planning. But the help I need is the one thing I can't ask for. I need someone to make me want to stay alive, and that's not fair to put on any one person, even someone who loves me as much as Dylan does. These diary entries show that Kurt's suicide wasn't the result of isolation or lack of support. He was surrounded by people who cared about him, who would have done anything to help him. His tragedy was that he couldn't figure out how to accept that help without feeling like he was drowning the people he loved in his own darkness. The final entry about Dylan, written just hours before Kurt's death, shows a man saying goodbye to his best friend in the only way he felt he could. If there's an afterlife, I hope Dylan knows I didn't leave because I didn't love him enough. I left because I loved him too much to keep making him worry about me. He deserves a life that isn't constantly interrupted by Kurt Cobain's emergencies. Maybe now he can have that. The letter Kurt wrote but couldn't deliver. Hidden within the final pages of Kurt Cobain's diary is perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery of all, a complete letter addressed to everyone who cared about me that he wrote but never sent. Unlike the suicide note found with his body, which was brief and focused on his disillusionment with music, this letter was a detailed explanation of his mental state and his reasons for choosing death. The letter, spread across 6 pages of his small notebook, reads like Kurt's final attempt to help people understand a decision that he knew would seem senseless from the outside. I know that nothing I write here will make my death make sense to you. How could it? I'm trying to explain something I don't fully understand myself. But I owe it to everyone who loved me to at least try. The thing about depression that nobody talks about is how boring it becomes. Everyone focuses on the dramatic moments, the breakdowns, the overdoses, the times when you can't stop crying. But the real killer is the endless gray days when you feel nothing at all, when you're too numb to cry and too tired to fight. Kurt's letter attempts to address the common responses he anticipated to his suicide. People will say I had everything to live for, and they're right. I had a beautiful daughter, a wife who loved me despite my flaws, friends who were loyal beyond reason, and a career that let me turn my pain into something meaningful. The fact that none of that was enough to make me want to stay alive is exactly what's wrong with me. You'll want to blame someone or something: the drugs, the fame, the pressure, Courtney, the music industry, my childhood. But the truth is simpler and more complicated than that. I'm just broken in a way that can't be fixed, and I'm tired of pretending that trying harder will eventually work. The letter includes specific messages for different groups of people in Kurt's life, showing how much thought he had given to the impact of his death. To my fans, I'm sorry if my music helped you through dark times and now my death makes those times darker. But please don't let my inability to keep going stop you from finding your own reasons to stay. The songs will outlive me, and maybe that's enough. To other musicians, don't let my story scare you away from making art about pain. The music didn't kill me, the pain did. The music was the only thing that made the pain bearable for as long as it was. To people struggling with depression, I know you're going to see my suicide as proof that it's hopeless, that even someone with every advantage can't beat this disease. But I'm just one person with one story. Your story doesn't have to end the same way. The most devastating section of the letter is addressed to Frances, written as if Kurt was trying to have a conversation with his daughter across time. Frances, my little bean, when you're old enough to read this, you'll probably be angry with me for leaving you. That's okay. You have the right to be angry with your father for choosing death over staying to watch you grow up. I want you to know that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time I looked at your face, I found a new reason to try to stay. But I also found a new reason to be scared that my sadness would teach you that love comes with suffering, that caring about someone means watching them hurt. You're too young now to understand this, but someday you'll learn that some people are born with brains that don't work quite right. Mine has been telling me I'm worthless and that everyone would be better off without me since I was a teenager. I've tried medicine, therapy, success, love, everything I could think of to make those voices stop. They never did. I hope you'll remember that I loved you more than music, more than anything I ever created or achieved. Leaving you wasn't about not loving you enough, it was about loving you too much to keep damaging you with my presence. The letter also reveals Kurt's awareness of how his suicide would be covered in the media. I know the newspapers will make this about drugs or fame or rock star excess. They'll turn my death into a cautionary tale about the price of success. But that's not what this is. This is about a sick person who ran out of ways to get better, who chose to stop fighting a war he was never going to win. Please don't let them turn me into a symbol of anything except the importance of taking mental illness seriously. I had access to the best treatment, unlimited resources, people who cared about my well-being. If I couldn't beat this with all those advantages, imagine how much harder it is for people who don't have them. Near the end of the letter, Kurt's writing becomes more philosophical, as if he's trying to find some larger meaning in his decision. I used to think that artists were supposed to suffer, that pain was the price you paid for being able to create beautiful things. But I think that's bullshit. Pain doesn't make art more authentic, it just makes it harder to create. I would have been a better musician, a better father, a better person if I could have found a way to be happy. Maybe my death will at least be useful if it helps people understand that mental illness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're talented or successful or loved. It's a disease, and like any disease, sometimes it wins despite everyone's best efforts to fight it. The letter ends with Kurt trying to offer some form of comfort to the people who would mourn him. I want you to remember the good parts, the music that moved you, the moments when I made you laugh, the times when my songs helped you feel less alone. Those things were real too, and they don't disappear just because I couldn't find a way to keep going. Thank you for loving someone who was often very hard to love. Thank you for seeing something beautiful in my broken places. Thank you for giving my noise a place to live in the world. I'm going somewhere quiet now, where the voices in my head can't follow me. Don't follow me there. Stay here, in the loud, beautiful, messy world, and make your own noise. This letter was never sent, never shared with the people it was written for. It remains hidden in Kurt's diary, a final conversation with the world that only exists on paper. Those who have read it describe it as both heartbreaking and illuminating, proof that Kurt's suicide wasn't the impulsive act of someone who had stopped caring, but the calculated decision of someone who cared so much it was killing him. What Kurt's diary means today. Nearly 30 years after Kurt Cobain's death, his secret diary remains one of the most powerful documents ever written about suicide, mental illness, and the impossible weight of fame. The fact that these intensely personal thoughts were never meant to be seen by anyone else makes them even more valuable as a window into the mind of someone struggling with depression at its most severe. Mental health professionals who have studied excerpts from Kurt's diary note how clearly it illustrates the distorted thinking patterns that characterize severe depression. Dr. K. Redfield Jamieson, one of the world's leading experts on mood disorders, has written about how Kurt's entries show the classic signs of someone whose illness had convinced them that death was actually a form of love. What's so tragic about Kurt's diary is that it shows someone who was capable of profound empathy and self-reflection, but whose depression had completely distorted his ability to see himself clearly. He could understand other people's pain with incredible accuracy, but he couldn't see that his own family and friends loved him enough to help him carry his burden. The diary has also become an important document for suicide prevention advocates. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline has used carefully selected excerpts, with permission from the Cobain estate, in training materials for crisis counselors, showing how someone can be actively suicidal while still being thoughtful, articulate, and deeply concerned about the welfare of others. Kurt's diary destroys a lot of myths about suicide, explains Dr. David Jobs, a leading suicide researcher. It shows that people who choose to end their lives aren't necessarily impulsive, irrational, or uncaring. Sometimes they're making what feels like a logical decision based on profoundly distorted information about their value to the world. For Frances Bean Cobain, now an adult, her father's diary entries have provided both comfort and continued grief. In one of her rare public statements about Kurt's death, she has said that reading his private thoughts helped her understand that his suicide wasn't about anything she did or didn't do. The diary shows how much my father loved me, but also how completely his illness had convinced him that his love was somehow harmful to me. It's heartbreaking to see how wrong he was about that, but it also helps me understand that his decision wasn't really about me at all, it was about a sick person's distorted view of reality. The diary has also influenced how Courtney Love talks about Kurt's death. For years after his suicide, she struggled with anger and guilt, wondering if she could have done something different. Reading Kurt's private thoughts about their relationship helped her understand that he had been planning his death regardless of what she said or did. The diary showed me that Kurt had been saying goodbye for months, in ways I couldn't see at the time. He was protecting me from his decision by making it seem sudden and unpredictable. It doesn't make the loss hurt less, but it helps me understand that I wasn't responsible for saving someone who had decided he couldn't be saved. For Nirvana's surviving members, Kurt's diary entries have provided closure to questions that had haunted them for decades. Dave Grohl has said that reading Kurt's thoughts about the band helped him understand that their friend's suicide wasn't about feeling trapped by musical success, but about feeling trapped by his own mind. The diary shows that Kurt never blamed us or the music for his pain. He was grateful for what we had created together, but he couldn't separate the joy of making music from the weight of being seen as a spokesperson for an entire generation's angst. Reading his private thoughts helped me stop wondering if we could have saved him by breaking up the band or taking a longer break. The broader impact of Kurt's diary extends beyond his immediate circle to anyone who has struggled with mental illness or loved someone who has. The entries provide a rare glimpse into the internal experience of severe depression, not the romanticized version often portrayed in movies or books, but the grinding, exhausting reality of living with a brain that has turned against itself. What makes Kurt's diary particularly powerful is how it shows someone fighting against their illness even as they plan to surrender to it. Many of the entries show Kurt actively trying to find reasons to stay alive, making lists of things he was grateful for, documenting moments of joy or connection. But they also show how depression can turn even positive experiences into evidence that life isn't worth living. Had a great day with Frances yesterday. She was so happy, so full of energy and curiosity about everything. But watching her just reminded me how much I don't feel that way anymore. How can I teach her to love life when I can't remember how to do it myself? Maybe the kindest thing I can do is get out of her way before I teach her that existing is supposed to hurt. This kind of thinking, where love becomes a reason for suicide rather than a reason for survival, illustrates how completely depression can distort someone's relationship with reality. Kurt's diary shows a man who was capable of profound insight about other people's experiences, but who couldn't apply that same clarity to his own situation. The diary has also become important in discussions about how society treats mental illness in public figures. Kurt's entries show someone acutely aware that his personal struggles had become entertainment for millions of people, that his pain was being consumed as art by fans who had no understanding of what it cost him to create it. Every interview, every article, every review treats my depression like it's this interesting artistic choice rather than a disease that's slowly killing me. People talk about my tortured artist persona like it's something I put on for the cameras, not something I'm drowning in every single day. This observation has become particularly relevant in the age of social media, where celebrities' mental health struggles are often treated as content to be consumed rather than human experiences deserving of compassion and privacy. Perhaps most importantly, Kurt's diary serves as a reminder that suicide is never really about a single cause or a simple explanation. His entries show someone dealing with depression, addiction, chronic pain, the pressures of fame, childhood trauma, and a dozen other factors that combine to create an unbearable situation. People will want to point to one thing and say that's why Kurt killed himself: the drugs, or the fame, or his relationship with his father, or whatever. But it's not that simple. It's like being slowly crushed under the weight of 100 small stones rather than being hit by one big rock. Any single stone might have been bearable, but altogether they became more than I could carry. The final entry in Kurt's diary, written just hours before his death, shows someone who had made peace with his decision but was still struggling with its implications. "I'm not killing myself because I hate the world or because I'm angry at anyone. I'm killing myself because I'm tired of being in pain and I can't figure out any other way to make it stop. I hope someday science will find better ways to help people like me, but I can't wait that long." To anyone who reads this someday, please remember that I wasn't a symbol or a spokesperson or a cautionary tale. I was just a person who got sick and couldn't get better. Don't let my story scare you away from asking for help if you need it. Maybe you'll be luckier than I was. Maybe your story will have a different ending. These words, written by a man just hours before he would end his own life, serve as both a goodbye and a final plea. They remind us that behind every suicide is not just a death, but a human being who ran out of ways to keep going, who chose silence not because they didn't care about the noise they were leaving behind, but because the noise in their own head had become too loud to survive. Kurt Cobain's secret diary remains sealed from public view, but its existence has changed how we understand both his death and the ongoing conversation about mental illness, creativity, and the price of fame. It stands as proof that even our most detailed explanations for why someone chooses death will always be incomplete, because the decision to die is ultimately as mysterious and individual as the decision to live. The red notebook that contained Kurt's final thoughts sits in a safety deposit box, a testament to the private struggles of a very public figure. It may never be fully released, but its impact has already been felt by anyone who has ever wondered what goes through someone's mind in their final days, who has ever struggled to understand how someone with so much to live for could choose death instead. In the end, Kurt's diary is both his final gift and his final burden to those who loved him, the knowledge that he didn't leave because he didn't care, but because he cared so much that living had become an act of cruelty to everyone around him. It's a logic that only makes sense to a mind in the grip of severe mental illness, but it's the logic that ended one of music's most important voices and left the world a little quieter, a little less honest, and a lot more aware of how much we still don't understand about the human heart's capacity to break. This account is based on various reports about Kurt Cobain's mental state in his final weeks and documented struggles with depression and suicidal ideation. While Kurt did keep personal journals, the specific content described here is dramatized based on known facts about his psychological state and statements made by those close to him. The narrative is meant to explore the documented reality of his mental illness while treating the subject with appropriate sensitivity. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of self-harm, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988 or the crisis text line by texting HOME to 741741. Subscribe to Nirvana's Dark Secrets for more untold stories about grunge's greatest legend. Sometimes the most important truths are found in the words that were never meant to be heard.